What is an extremely dark or creepy true story that most people don't know about? Hi all, it's Em. Let's hop into these stories and enjoy some good true stories. If you have any of your own, feel free to drop them in the comments below, and I'll reply to any that really get me interested. Story 1. Well, here's a feel-good unsolved murder. Ken Rex McElroy was a resident of Skidmore, Nodaway County, Missouri. Known as the town bully, his unsolved killing became the focus of international attention. Over the course of his life, McElroy was accused of dozens of felonies, including assault, child molestation, statutory R-word, arson, hog and cow rustling, and burglary. In all, he was indicted 21 times, but escaped conviction each time, except for the last. In 1980s, one of McElroy's children got into an argument with a clerk, named Evelyn Sumi, because McElroy's son tried to steal some candy from the local grocery store owned by 7-year-old Ernest Bowenkamp. This began the stalking of the Bowenkamp family, and eventually he threatened Bowenkamp in the back of his store with a shotgun in hand. This began the ensuing confrontation, and McElroy shot Bowenkamp in the neck. Bowenkamp survived, and McElroy was arrested and charged with attempted murder. McElroy was convicted at trial of assault, but freed on bail pending his appeal. Immediately after being released at a post-trial hearing, McElroy went to the D&G Tavern, a local bar, with an M1 Garand rifle and made graphic threats about what he would do to Mr. Bowenkamp. This led to several patrons deciding to see what they could legally do to prevent McElroy from harming anyone else. Nodaway County Sheriff Dan Estes suggested they form a neighborhood watch. On the morning of July 10th, 1981, after his appeal hearing was again delayed, townspeople met at the Legion Hall in the center of town with Sheriff Estes to discover how to protect themselves. During the meeting, McElroy arrived at the D&G Tavern with Trina. As he sat drinking at the bar, word got back to the men at the Legion Hall that he was in town. After instructing the assembled group not to get in a direct confrontation with McElroy, but seriously consider forming a neighborhood watch program, Sheriff Estes drove out of town in his police cruiser. The citizens decided to go to the tavern en masse. The bar soon filled completely. After McElroy finished his drinks, he purchased a 6-pack of beer, left the bar, and entered his pickup truck. While McElroy was sitting in his truck, he was shot several times and hit twice. One by a centerfire rifle and once by a .22 rimfire rifle. In all, there were 46 potential witnesses to this shooting, including Trina McElroy, who was in the truck with her husband when he was shot. No one called for an ambulance. Only Trina claimed to identify a gunman. Every other witness either was unable to name an assailant or claimed not to have seen who fired the fatal shots. The DA declined to press charges. An extensive federal investigation did not lead to any charges. Somebody then commented something pretty funny. Sheriff, well, don't go and do anything like shoot him or lynch him or run him over or tie him up and put him in a pen full of hungry pigs. Just, maybe form a neighborhood watch or something. Wink, wink. Townspeople with a blank stare. Sheriff, okay, I'm hungry, gonna drive about 25 miles away for some lunch. Just don't take matters into your own hands or anything. Townspeople, This is like one of those stories you hear about where some people argue that the murder is justified. I'm not going to argue for one or the other because I try to be a pacifist if I can, but I can totally understand the frustration for the townsfolk were feeling with the justice system for repeatedly letting someone who was guilty get away with it when he would continue to just keep hurting people. So I guess I would say it's almost fair that no one got arrested for it, since this dude also never got seriously arrested and put in jail. I guess karma really does always take its toll. Story 2. Honestly, one of the scariest missing child cases is the disappearance of Johnny Ghosh. In September, sometime during the 1980s, a newspaper delivery boy named Johnny Ghosh goes missing while delivering early morning papers. His parents get a call a few hours later from a neighbor complaining they didn't get their papers. So the father goes out looking and the boy is gone. There's so much more that it just becomes more and more disturbing as time goes on. Witnesses were able to piece together a picture. One of the delivery boys saw a tall man come out from between two houses and follow Johnny as he walked. Another boy said that a passing car stopped so a guy could ask the boys for directions. But when they tried to get a neighbor to help, the car sped off. Johnny supposedly told the other paper boy he was scared by this and was gonna head home. And allegedly alleged incident was described by his mother, in which a car stopped. The driver took out a camera to take a picture of Johnny walking home from school and drove off. Johnny was said to have certain scars and to stutter when he was upset. These details weren't reported on the news, but a man later came forward, claiming the boy was in the custody of a trafficking ring. He named these details without having any prior knowledge of the boy. He also mentioned that Johnny had allegedly mentioned his mother's favorite hobbies. Again, it wasn't put on the news. Police didn't take all of it seriously due to a lack of evidence. Years later, his mother received photographs on her front porch. A boy who looked a lot like Johnny was bound and gagged on a bed. She believed it was him, even though others didn't think so. His mother says that her missing son visited her one night as an adult. He supposedly looked very different and told her that he was abducted into a trafficking ring. Supposedly, he said he had to leave because he was in fear of his life, and that an encounter was supposedly 20 years ago. This makes me so sad for the mother and the boy. No one should ever go through that, and it is absolute and utter BS that the police seem to not be doing more to help Johnny. I'm happy he was able to get away, but he probably still lives in constant fear for his life. Either that or someone just decided to play a really sick prank on a grieving mother. Story 3. 2 tween girls were R-worded and stabbed by underage boys in the back of a park in the town I grew up in. One died, one survived, and made it to the train tracks and someone spotted her. They thought she was wearing a red bathing suit, but it was all the blood and stab wounds. The boys weren't tried as adults, and in the wake of that crap show of a case, laws were changed about how adolescents would be tried for violent crimes. A few years ago, a local high-ranking military officer had his estranged wife locked in a mental ward, and then brutally strangled their 14-year-old son and shot himself. She had gone to the cops and begged them to save her son because she believed he would kill him. There was a long history of domestic violence and death threats that the police had done nothing about. And then they wouldn't even let the woman out of the psych ward for her son's funeral. My family had recently escaped my father, who was also military and also extremely abusive and had threatened to kill us. I often wonder if we had interacted with the wrong cops, if I'd be dead like that kid. I seriously don't understand why we got away, and no one gave a crap about him or his mom. I mean, no one really gave a crap about us either, but at least we were believed when we gave statements. Someone commented, "That is awful. I'm sorry you had to go through that, but I'm glad you're safe." Domestic violence is something that a lot of people claim to take seriously, but when presented with concrete proof, it can sometimes still not be enough to put the guilty party away. My heart goes to the mother who just wanted to help her son, and then wasn't even able to lay him to rest. I am happy OP was able to get away, and hopefully they're still safe right now. Story 4. I think the scale of the suicide epidemic, at least in the US, probably qualifies. We're so paranoid about murder, but fewer than 20,000 people a year die by homicide every year. I think it was around 16,000 in 2016. By contrast, more than 40,000 people die by suicide each year. The CDC estimates that someone dies by suicide every 13 minutes on average. Yet we rarely talk about it seriously or offer help. We are content to live with the stigma and shame that leads to more needless deaths. This is an ongoing problem that we refuse to deal with, because it's easier to blame suicide victims for being weak or selfish or whatever other excuse we can use to explain it away. The really scary thing is that many people are probably closer to being victims of suicide than they realize. A large proportion of suicides are impulsive, with the victim experiencing suicidal thoughts for mere hours, maybe a day before they act. This isn't something that only severely depressed people in horrible situations experience. It's something that can affect anyone. Pretty much everyone who has survived an impulsive suicide talks about how they immediately regretted their decision, as they suddenly realized that their problems could be fixed. And the really terrible thing to me is that impulsive suicide victims tend to also use highly lethal methods. It's kind of horrifying to think about how many people have spent their last moments wishing they hadn't stepped off that ledge or pulled that trigger. Story 5. It is estimated that between 3 to 6% of the world's population, around 50 to 100 million people, died during the only global pandemic, the Spanish flu. It is the only level 5 pandemic so far. It was killed in 3 different waves, with the second in mid-1818 being the deadliest. Troop ships transporting U.S. troops to Europe to participate in World War I would be floating charnel houses. Many ships would leave port with 60% of soldiers already sickened and would arrive in France 2 weeks later, with a whole ship sickened. Reports of ship decks flowed with vomited blood as soldiers became affected. On land, populations of towns literally disappeared due to the flu. The flu burned itself out in 1919, but later flu outbreaks decades later showed descent from the 1918 flu. The origin of the flu is unknown, but a theory is pointed toward a wild bird flu in the United States, crossed into pigs and equine flu, making a Frankenstein's-type flu. With troops literally living with pigs, geese, and horses in the trenches of World War I, this seems plausible. The massive troop movements of quick-moving ships aided in the flu transmission globally. Serial killers got nothing on Mother Nature. While I do think most people know about the Spanish flu, I do agree that most people don't know the full gravity of the situation, especially considering at that time, a lot of people did understand basic hygienic practices. It did kill so many people from all around the world, and so fast and brutally. It honestly did more damage than COVID did, which is wild to think about. Story 6. Most dark story that I know happened to a family in the small town where I grew up in rural Kentucky. This happened when I was in the 1st grade. Mom was at home while husband was at work. They had 3 daughters, one that was 6, she was in my grade, 9 and 18, who was visiting from university for the weekend. All 3 daughters were riding on an ATV, riding trails in the area. This particular trail intersected a busy road with lots of twists and blind spots. The girls were hit by a rushing ambulance that only had their emergency lights going. All 3 girls died on the scene after getting hit by the 70-mile-per-hour truck. The ambulance then slid off the road and rolled down an embankment, seriously injuring the EMTs. The part that's hardest to believe is that the ambulance was responding to an emergency at the lumber yard, where the father was working. He had a heart attack while on the job and died before help finally arrived. This was in the late 90s. The mother committed suicide a couple years ago. I can't even begin to fathom her pain and suffering that she endured for years. Story 7. This one is a creepy situation that doesn't involve any creepy people. About an hour north of the southern tip of Texas, there's a bridge out to South Padre Island, a beach community that's a bit of a spring break destination. One night, a large ship crashed into a pylon on the bridge, causing a massive concrete section to collapse into the sea, one by one. About 20 cars driving over the bridge suddenly fell 100 feet into the ocean before someone finally managed to stop. Since then, they've put up a sign warning cars to stop if the lights are blinking. Every time I drive over that bridge, I imagine the taillights in front of me suddenly disappearing and wonder how many seconds I would have to stop. Somebody commented, "Geez, I just looked this up." I guess nobody except locals heard about it because this occurred a few days after September 11th. One section of bridge out, cars just driving off. Apparently, it's possible to survive an 85-foot drop into the ocean in a vehicle, as 3 people did. Story 8. One night at 4 a.m. on a school night in high school, we were awoken by a SWAT team trying to break our door down with a battering ram. I get into the hallway and look down at the front door, and my dad opens the door and I see bright LEDs on a riot shield. And we all have to come out of our house with our hands up. They searched the house, gathered all electronics, eventually found child bad videos on my brother's computer. My parents, my sister, and I were in the basement while I heard the handcuffs click. Somebody commented another story. A similar, though less intense event happened to a friend. They were about 5 minutes ready to leave for surgery, and swarms of police came in and searched the house without telling them what was going on. Turns out their dad had a lot of stored child bad videos. I imagine it's really difficult to love someone and then find out they purposely did something very wrong. Hope your family is doing well. We've talked about this a bit in past videos, but seriously, it's so many times people who you would think would never do something like this. I actually found out one of my high school teachers got arrested last year, I think, for having a bunch of this kind of stuff on his school laptop. He was so nice and never creepy to any students, but it really hit home to me that even the nicest people can be bad at their core. Story 9. The Pacific Northwest has an unsolved mystery regarding severed feet that keep popping up on beaches over the past few years. All of these feet which have been found so far have shown up to buoyant shoes. Some investigators have declared that this is the result of suicide victims' feet becoming disarticulated from the rest of their bodies as they decompose. However, some sets of shoes have ended up in completely different places. Example, one in False Creek, Vancouver, the other on Vancouver Island. This has created a culture of disbelief regarding these investigations. Also, for those of you who don't know, BC has a very comprehensive database of missing persons DNA. Many of these feet don't match anyone in said database. Some locals theorize that a serial killer is bringing their victims BC for disposal. Many of these occurrences have been situated around the British Columbian coast. However, some have been found as far south as Seattle. Story 10. My grandma is believed to have had an interaction with a serial killer. My mom had told me this story. It was my grandma, my mom, and her 3 siblings driving out of the Bay Area very late one night. They saw a man on the side of the road with his hazards on, and he was pulled over. He asked for a ride in their car to the nearest gas station. My grandma got weird vibes and decided not to help him. Months later, my grandma read in the newspaper a description of a murder in the outskirts of San Francisco. The remains were found near the same area my family was in, and several other women were reported to have encountered the same man on that road. He was believed to be the Zodiac Killer. Somebody commented, "I can't believe your grandma turned down Ted Cruz. All he wanted was to get some gas." Story 11. The story of Kenny Veach. He was a hiker who went missing in Nevada. He made a YouTube video about finding a cave during a hike, but he didn't go in it because it brought a strong uneasy feeling. He said he would come back with his gun in case there was a hostile animal or something. He made a video of trying to find it again and he couldn't locate it. The video is still up on YouTube. Then someone posted a comment warning him about the cave. Finally, he went back a 3rd time to try to find this cave and then never came back. No one has been able to find him or this cave that he was talking about. The circumstances are just incredibly creepy. It sounds like an urban legend, but it's true and it still freaks me out. Yeah, not to be too harsh on this dude, but if you go somewhere and go back only to not find it, I think that's honestly time to pack it up and go home and be thankful you didn't get into trouble the first time around. Story 12. I remember a case, going off memory here, in North Carolina, where a woman in therapy recovered the memory of seeing her father's face in a privy. Her father had abandoned the family when she was like 5 or 6, and she and her siblings were raised by their mom. I think the woman was in her 40s or more, so it'd been a long time. But a few more memories drifted up, like finding her mom in the kitchen, mopping up a lot of blood. She confronted her mother, who denied it all, but was convincing enough that the local sheriff ordered the old privy site to be dug up. Turns out Dad hadn't run off. He was in there in pieces. The elderly mother committed suicide the next day. Story 13. Late posting this thread, but the Jamie Bolger case. 2 10-year-old boys abducted a toddler from a shopping center, forced him to walk for miles before torturing and beating him to death on a train track. They did really sick crap like poured paint on his face and shoved batteries up his rectum. The 2 boys got out, given new identities. One has since been sent back to prison for repeated offenses. It is all very hush-hush where they live, etc. Strangely, back in 2002, one was housed on an estate I worked on. Members of the public were tipped off it was him. All his windows got smashed and a mob of people were after lynching him. Police rushed him away and he wasn't seen again. I feel no sympathy for the one that got put back away because he seems like he hasn't changed at all. But I do wonder about the other one. Nothing would ever condone his actions and the pain he put that poor toddler through. But part of me wonders if he has tried to change his ways and become a better person since then. And if that is the case, does he deserve to be treated the way he was? I think that's more of a personal question though, rather than an opinion. Story 14. Lebensborn is a surprisingly not very well-known part of World War II. It was a breeding program to get more Aryan people. Some volunteered, but they would also kidnap especially Aryan-looking people in Scandinavia and Germany and force them to do it. Then the children would be brought up in an SS institution, away from their biological parents. Somebody commented, "A place where I spent a large part of my childhood was revealed to be a Lebensborn location, only 10 years ago. That's 60 years after the end of the war." People really avoid talking about such subjects even more than about the Holocaust. Story 15. My mom always tells me this story. She was dating this guy who seemed really well off. He always got her jewelry as gifts and would always take her out. She says he basically treated her like a princess, and he was always very nice. She said she always got a weird feeling from him, but wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt since he was so nice and treated her well. The weird feeling never went away, so she broke up with him. 2 months later, she sees his picture on the news for murdering his mom and sister. I first thought OP was just gonna say that the dude turned out to be like a serial shoplifter or something. So finding out the dude was a murderer was a true plot twist for me. Like, I fully did not see that coming. At all. Story 16. The story of Carl Tanzler. Dude fell in love with a younger Cuban girl who was diagnosed with tuberculosis, who later died of the disease. He offered to pay for a tomb for her to be buried to his specifications, which the family accepted, which turned out to be a mistake, because he ended up sneaking in and taking her corpse. Later, her sister claims the doctor had been living with the body, so when the cops showed up, they discovered a body coated in wax and turned into a private doll. Story 17. Story might be slightly off due to memory. There's a lake on the way to Disney World. Signs weren't clear, and many families would accidentally drive into the lake, coincidentally with no one around. Eventually, someone caught a car going into the lake and called the police. What came out of it was many missing people reports being solved. There's now a clear reflective sign where the mishaps would happen. I think a half dozen, give or take, died due to the lake. If I'm right, it's near Celebration. Story 18. Joyce Vincent documentary, Dreams of a Life. This 38-year-old London woman was dead for over 3 years in her apartment before anybody knew. She was estranged from her father and siblings, but even in London had long-term jobs and boyfriends. I am completely obsessed with this story, but not in a way that is upsetting. Her TV was still on and she had wrapped Christmas presents apparently to give away. That's so sad. It seemed like she had people to go celebrate with and was looking forward to it. These are the kinds of things where I just wonder how many people can go that long without being checked on. Like, what about the boyfriend, her friends, her work colleagues, her boss? Or even just somebody who complained about a smell. I guess this is just a reminder to call our loved ones and check up on them. Story 19. The name of the actual victim escapes me, but a woman was murdered, and the criminal would call the victim's mother years later and ask her, "Can I speak to your daughter?" as some form of psychological torture. It was like in the 60s or something like that. So he knew it was nearly impossible for his calls to be traced. That story always infuriates me. Story 20. Norfolk 4. Seen a documentary about it, and you'll be in disbelief about how many military members went to prison based on absolute BS. One guy was many miles away at his own birthday party with dozens of witnesses and still convicted of murder and sent to prison. There are so many stories about stuff like this, and so many of them, it's blatantly obvious that there was no way the person could have done it. One of my favorite ones was that the father who was going to be arrested until there was footage of him with his daughter at a baseball game during the alleged time period the crime happened, and he was cleared of charges. There are even some new laws in different states in the US that are pushing for more restitution for prisoners who are released after being wrongly convicted. Story 21. The gas used on the prisoners in concentration camps by the SS was discovered and developed by an agriculture scientist prior to World War I. He was German-born, and he was Jewish. Story 22. The Somerton man freaks me up. Dude died, they don't really know why. Don't know who he was, where he came from, why he was on the beach, where he died. Story 23. The story about the guy, John Jones, that died upside down after 28 hours in the Nutty Putty Cave has haunted me since I learned about it. I think I talked about splunking one of the very first videos I did, and I have the same opinion now. I will never, ever do it. I'm not claustrophobic per se, but the thought of getting stuck in a cave is just a huge no-go for me. I really don't want to meet Gollum. Story 24. In my hometown, they pull out many dead bodies from the lake. Some are the missing people we know are missing. Many are people we have no clue who they are. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.